Thank you. Welcome to The Wealthy Barber Returns, our sequel to The Wealthy Barber. It's fun to be back. It's exciting to be back this quickly. None of us could have foreseen the success of the first Wealthy Barber. We thought it would be a moderate success, that it would teach some people how better to handle their finances. But it took off, went national. We're already doing the second show. That's why we're here now. The two shows, by the way, are very much different. The first show concentrated on general concepts, dollar cost averaging, forced saving, the power of compounding, that type of thing. Today we're going to get a little more specific. We're going to talk a lot about retirement planning, how best to get at your retirement funds later on. And in segment number 3, we're going to look at a lot of fun things. Things that conventional wisdom tends to say one thing about, and Chilton wisdom tends to look at a little bit differently. And I think we'll have a lot of fun with segment number 3. Now, by the way, I did find that applause opening up in segment number 1 here a little bit more genuine than the first show. The first show was embarrassing. I walk out and the people are just, yes, Wealthy Barber. No one knew who I was. No. Seriously, no one knew who I was because, of course, the show had never aired. We were just taping it, and the book hadn't been released yet. So I walk out, and they're, Wealthy Barber, Wealthy Barber. The one guy looking at me looks at his wife and goes, who is this guy? And so he's going nuts, and he doesn't know who I am. I mean, they all thought it was a hair care infomercial. And half the people expected Cher to walk out on a stage at any point and start selling product, but it never happened. The other thing with the first show was I'd played touch football the previous Saturday, and I'd blown my knee out, and I had to get surgery, and literally couldn't walk. I showed up here in crutches to do the show, and of course that was no good, so we had to throw those aside. But if you ever have a chance to watch the first show again, you'll notice the whole thing is taped from my waist up. It's like Elvis does financial planning. It was brutal. I couldn't walk around. I was limping everywhere and lifting my leg up, but we made it through, and as I mentioned, went on to become a big success. And I think that success proves that people want to learn this stuff. People do indeed want to learn more about their personal finances. They want to know how to handle their money better. But in the past, they've been very intimidated by it. They thought you had to have good math skills, a very good accounting background. That's not the case. This stuff is not complicated. In fact, if you make it tricky, you'll do very poorly. All right? The bad things, the things that don't work, they really are complex. Options, limited partnerships, commodities, that stuff is challenging. But the good things, paying yourself first, maximizing contributions to things like 401ks and 403bs, being properly insured, that's well within all of our grasps. And that was the thrust of the show and also of the book, was to bring this stuff and make it fun. Now, why the barbershop set, in case you missed show number 1? Well, the Wealthy Barber book is a novel. And I think that's why it's done so well. It's a novel that teaches the basics of personal finance. It's set in a small town, uses a lot of humor, very different delivery style. Now, when I first wrote the book, I must admit, I never thought it was going to become a big hit. In fact, I thought it would sell about 5,000 copies. To show you how small we were thinking, when the book first came out, my grandmother phoned one night and bought 12 copies. My wife and I were running around high-fiving each other. Seriously, that was a huge deal at the Chilton household. We were like, yes, we packed up the books, shipped them off, and invoiced her in full. No discounts for grandmas. My father has told hundreds of people that I'm the first illiterate to ever write a bestseller. I don't know what illiterate means, but I don't like his tone. I am, by the way, a step ahead of my sister. She overheard that remark, and she said, David, you're not illiterate. Mom and Dad were married when they had you. You guys get that one? If I go too fast, you guys let me know, all right? Now, I mentioned earlier, I want to focus a lot on retirement planning. There are a tremendous number of objectives within the financial planning framework. You want to plan for your children's education. You want to, of course, handle your credit wisely, save for a bigger home, and so on and so forth. But I think everyone would agree the most important objective is saving for retirement. In fact, if you combine that objective with the mandatory of being properly insured, you got to have the right life insurance, health insurance, disability insurance. If you just do those two things properly, you're in pretty good shape. You'll muddle through in the rest of the areas. Okay? Now again, all of us recognize and agree that saving for retirement is the most important objective, yet very few people do it well. In fact, very few people do it at all. There are tremendous numbers of people, tens of millions of people, currently headed toward a retirement of very low income. All right, very low income. Now, why do people do that? Well, there are a number of excuses offered up. Probably the most common one is this. It's tough enough to make ends meet now, forget the future. You know what? That's a pretty legitimate excuse. It is tough to make ends meet now. It's always been tough to save. I mean, it involves making sacrifices. We tend not to do that well. We all have to save for our futures. That's where we're going to spend the rest of our lives. So what you try to do is the least painful saving. That's what we'll focus on throughout the course of the show. Now again, most people would agree with that, but they tend to still rationalize this excuse away with a second excuse. They say, okay, I recognize I have to save, but retirement's so far off, I'll worry about it later. I hear this all the time. People always are pushing it off. Well, procrastination was without a doubt the biggest enemy in financial planning. You've got to start now. By waiting, you're costing yourself tens of thousands of dollars. Time plus money plus compound interest can work wonders. We'll look at a few examples later. But time is the most important variable. You have to take advantage of it. And the only way to do that is to start right now. Let's look at an example here. Let's say one neighbor decided to set aside $4,000 per year at the end of each year, average a 9% return, pretty respectable, over a 5-year time frame. $23,940 approximately he'd accumulate. Not bad. The other neighbor, on the other hand, had started 15 years earlier. Same numbers, $4,000 per year at the end of the year, 9% rate of return, $204,000. Not 4 times as much, but almost 10 times as much money. That's, of course, because of the way compound interest works. All right, the important thing is to start right now. If you wait too long, you're going to be behind an 8 ball. It's going to be very difficult to get away from. It really is. Not only that, if this guy wanted to catch up, he'd have to save $34,000 a year over 5 years. Not going to happen. Okay, he's not going to do it. Even if he had the financial wherewithal, no one has that kind of discipline. All right, you've got to start now. There's another point that should be made that seldom is. It not only hurts you when you lose time from that perspective, mathematical perspective of time plus compound interest, but another angle comes to play. When you invest late in the game, you must take a more conservative approach. The better performing vehicles, things like stocks, for example, that have averaged over 10% over the last 40 and 50 years, involve some risk. There's no denying that. And the way to mitigate that risk is to focus long term. You've got to be thinking 7, 10, 12 years out. And if you are willing to do that, you'll be rewarded. But if you don't have those 7 to 10 to 12 years, the prudent approach, of course, is to go a more conservative way. Invest in things like CDs. The problem is that's also where the lower rates of return reside. So by passing on time, by waiting and waiting and waiting, 2 bad things have happened. You've lost the power of compounding, and you've also got to settle for lower rates of return. Tough pairing. Okay? When I go out and speak to companies, when I teach to high schools, the thing I focus on most, start now. It may seem simple, it may be trite, but it's such an important concept. You got to get it rolling. Not tomorrow, not 5 years from now, but right now. The third excuse I hear a tremendous amount of is this one. I'll be dead before I get there. I get that all the time. I say, you got to save some money for retirement. The guy said, I'll be dead. Okay, my dad's a very intelligent guy, great athlete. I mean, he's a really good guy. He says to me a couple years ago, yeah, I'm getting close to retirement. I said, well, I hope you're doing the right thing. You know, saving a lot of money. You don't have to attack your principal too early on. He goes, oh, well, I said, I don't worry about that. He said, my dad died when he was 69. I said, what doesn't mean you're going to? He says, well, I mean, don't worry about it. I said, what are you going to do if you don't? He says, well, your mother here, we're going to move in with you. That got a little ugly between my parents and my wife. She killed them. No, she didn't actually kill them, but she roughed them up a bit. All right. The message got through. All right. You've got to start now. I mean, the odds are dramatic that you're going to be in retirement. Over 80% of the population reaches the age of 65. Over 80%. And if you're already 25, 35, 45, 55, whatever, the odds, of course, for you are even higher because you've made it past a certain number of years. For example, how many people here are over the age of 65? How many are dead? All right. Now, admittedly, that's not overly scientific, but 100% we're alive, and that's my point. All right. All right, on we go. Number 4, isn't that what Social Security is for? Fortunately, I don't hear this excuse as much as we once did. The answer to this, obviously, is no. Social Security, at best, I repeat, at best, is a safety net. It is not a lot of money. I mean, if you were to rely exclusively on Social Security, you'd live barely above the poverty line. This is not big dollars we're talking here. And yet, what's more, I mean, let's be honest, we can't count on Social Security being there in its current form 10, 20, 30 years down the road. We've had demographic shifts. We've got an aging population. You may have the tax changes come through to try to reduce the deficit. All this is going to negatively impact Social Security. You must do more. The responsibility is with us, the individual. We've got to take it. It's a good building block. I mean, it's a start, but that's all it is. You can't rely on it and it alone. Excuse number 5 is very similar. What about my company pension? There are very few well-designed defined benefit pension plans, and they are becoming fewer and fewer. Companies are passing over the burden of responsibility to saving for retirement to the employee and away from the employer They're difficult to administer. They're very expensive to fund. It's a very competitive arena out there right now. The world economy, of course, you've got to pass off some of those responsibilities, and that's what you're seeing. We must take the responsibility. Now, if you have one, great stuff. But even then, be careful, because most of them aren't indexed. And what's more, it's a myth. It's a myth that most people spend much, much less in retirement than they did when they were working. They don't. They used to. I mean, people used to retire at 65 and die at 68. Okay, times have changed. People are retiring at 58, 60, 61 and living to be 90, 91, and 92. Many people in this audience will spend more years in retirement than they did working. Okay, times have changed. You can spend a lot of money. You're healthier, you want to do more. My dad spends a ton of money in retirement. It's very annoying. Very annoying. Okay? All right. Number 6. My spouse is an only child and has rich old parents. That's a good one. My only advice is there. Love that spouse. All right. Number 7, I don't understand financial planning. This is the one I get, especially when I go in and speak to young people. I tell them, you got to get involved in this stuff. I don't understand it. Well, take some time. Read a book. It's not that tough. Okay, you can gain an understanding of it. It's not that deep. You're talking about something that could make the difference of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in the course of your life. No one else is going to do it for you. Take a little time, acquaint yourself with the basics. It's not that challenging. Now, those are the excuses you often see. None of them really holds water. And none of them is the real reason why most of us don't save for retirement. The real reason we don't save for retirement is right here. Is right here. We don't want to. Okay, we don't want to. We don't want to make even the small sacrifices that are necessary. We want to live life to its fullest. Again, keeping up to the Joneses is so important to most people. We love to buy stuff. We love to buy stuff on credit. I mentioned reading. You have to get the basic knowledge. We don't want to read a financial planning book. They're boring. All right, except mine. All right? Mine's a page turner. All right, but they're boring. I don't even like reading them. I write them. Okay, they are boring. We don't want to read them. We don't want to make sacrifices. That's the real reason people don't save for retirement. It's that hurdle that an educator has to get past. How do you do it? Very simply. You try to teach people the most effective, in other words, the least painful way to save for retirement. You try to show them how to get to where they need to be without having a dramatic impact on their current standard of living. You try to teach them techniques that are fairly easy to implement, easy to maintain, easy to understand, because you need to have those 3 things if people will stick with the program. Now, for a vehicle to offer up all that, it would have to have 9 features. We're going to go through them quickly. If a vehicle is to be called the perfect retirement savings vehicle, it would have to have the following 9 features, and this is important stuff. First off, it would have to offer up a method of buying that involved forced saving. If you saw show number 1, you know I hate budgeting. Budgeting doesn't work. Okay, it looks good in books and it sounds great in theory, but in real life it's invariably sabotaged by human nature. I mean, who in here has budgeted successfully? Same person, all right? I mean, budgeting just doesn't work. The people who budget successfully are the same people that drink skim milk. All right? That's been proven. Okay? I mean, you don't want to party with them. What ends up, they end up in retirement with a whole bunch of money and no friends. All right? You don't want to go that route. Budgeting, again, is a myth. The way to save money has always been and will always be through forced saving. Pay yourself first. Take the money right off the top of the paycheck or directly out of the bank account. It works. You know, I would say of all the lines you hear in financial planning, the most important one is pay yourself first. You know, of all the thousands of people I've met who've come from modest income backgrounds and today are in very good financial position, that's been the common denominator. They take the money off the top of the paycheck or directly out of the bank account, and there's no way any vehicle can be called perfect if it doesn't offer an opportunity to employ that technique. Second thing you need to do and third thing you need to do are both related to taxes. You want to save with pre-tax dollars and you want to have tax-deferred growth. Now, pretty straightforward stuff. Why do you want to save with pre-tax dollars? Well, you've got more money working for you. Not only your money's in the program, but also the government's share of the money. And yes, you'll have to pay tax eventually, but in the meantime, it's all kicking in and compounding. Great stuff. The tax-deferred growth, same thing. Every year as you grow, instead of the government taking its share, it's all staying in place, and the numbers can get mind-boggling. Again, we'll look at an example later that will literally blow you away. No one knows what the future holds. Play the odds. If you can save with pre-tax dollars and get tax-deferred growth, do it. Maybe 1 out of 100 of you will end up regretting it, but I would be surprised even at that. I mean, who really knows? It all comes down to a guessing game. Okay? Take advantage. Why? Well, because then benefit number 4 again is all the more powerful, compounding. I love this stuff. If I could die and come back as one thing, it'd be compounding. You know, I love compounding. All right? I love to look at the examples. I never get sick of them. In fact, in show number 1, we did 3 or 4. I'm only going to give you one today, but it is a neat one. Remember when the king had the chess tournament? I got this a little bit off, but it's something along this line. The king had the chess tournament and all the peasants went in it. And a peasant won the tournament, and the king said, "What do you want for your winnings?" And the peasant very modestly and sheepishly said, "Take 1 kernel of wheat and place it on the first square of the chessboard. 2 in the second, 4 in the third, 8 in the fourth, and so on and so forth." Well, the king, not understanding the power of compound interest, said, "Sure, and that's nothing, go ahead and do it." What do you think it ended up being? 18.5 million trillion kernels of wheat. 18.5 million trillion. The king is in trouble. All right. What about the guy that had to count it? Okay, I mean, it's amazing what compounding can do. It is absolutely unbelievable. Now, a lot of people look at that example and go, yeah, 18.5 million trillion, it's so big, I can't even identify with it. Well, to put it in perspective for you, that's 16,000 million English muffins. Okay? It's a lot of English muffins. Now, as ridiculous as this story sounds, it's kind of playing itself out right now under a slightly altered form called the national debt. Compound interest can work against you just as well as it can work for you. And unfortunately, our government doesn't have the chance to deploy the same negotiation technique the king used. Okay? We got to pay, and it can get a little ugly. Compound interest can be a dangerous thing, but for most of us, it can be a very powerful thing. The 5th thing you want, employer matching. I mentioned earlier that a lot of employers are passing the buck, if you'll pardon the pun, off to us and saying, hey, you've got to take on the responsibility. But several are also offering to match your contribution to some extent. Well, this is a bit of a straightforward proposition. They're giving you money. You don't turn that down. And for it to be perfect, of course, that has to be available. We'll look at that much more in depth a little later on. Number 6, you want a variety of available cost-efficient investments. Why? Because don't put all your eggs in one basket is good advice. All right? And although we've all heard it 100, 1,000 times, a lot of people pay no attention to it. Most people I meet and have a chance to examine their finances, all their money is in the same basket. You have to diversify. If you make one severe mistake when you're not well diversified, it can wreck your finances for years. You must spread the risk. And for a vehicle to be called perfect, it has to offer you that opportunity by having a variety of choices. If, for example, you're young and you want to invest in common stocks, which makes some sense. I mean, you've got 25, 30, 35 years, that better be available to you. If the retirement plan only offered a chance to buy CDs, very safe but low returning investments, not a very good situation. Conversely, and I've never seen this happen, but it's a good example, what happens if you're older and could only buy stocks? That too could be very, very dangerous. You want as many choices as possible, and what's more, for obvious reasons, you want those choices to be cost efficient. You want them to have no loads, if possible, no commissions in other words, and good expense ratios. You want as much of your money working for you as possible. I mean, that's straightforward, but it's something worth paying attention to. You don't want to get involved in programs where there's a lot of money leaving your pocket and going to middlemen. So that's an important thing to pay attention to. Really. The 8th thing you want to pay attention to, and I know a lot of you are looking at this and saying, whoa, this doesn't make any sense. You want a penalty for early withdrawal. And this comes from the experience I've had in the industry. If you don't have something like that with any savings program, people won't be able to do it. What happens is, if they get past the first hurdle of not being able to save, the most difficult hurdle, the second one is, can you keep your hands off the money after the first few years? And most of us can't. You start seeing it grow, just hitting the bottom part of the compound interest curve, exactly when you shouldn't take it out, and we all get excited. Go on a trip, buy a bigger home, buy a car. You can't do that. And the only way to stop people from doing that, unfortunately, is with penalties. If you have a penalty there that stops people from doing it, great. So it sounds bad, but for most of us, it's very good. And finally, of course, you want generous allowable contributions. This other stuff's academic. If you can only put in 2, 3, 4, 500 a year, you want to be able to put aside some good money. 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, that's when it's all going to kick in. Now, if any plan could offer all 9 of those benefits, we'd be in pretty awesome shape. I mean, it would be the perfect vehicle. It would be easy to understand, easy to take care of, offering up a tremendous number of good things. Is there a plan that offers all that stuff? Well, we'll find out in Act 2. All right? Stay tuned for Act 2. We'll see you after the break. Thanks a lot.
Stay with us for more of The Wealthy Barber coming up.